Tracy Sable. Tonight on EWTN News Nightly, Hunter Biden in court. The president's son appears before a judge in Delaware. We have a report and reaction. Vatican Trial. We're in Rome, where a Vatican prosecutor recommends jail time for Cardinal Becciu. The U.S. and religion. A recent poll has some revealing numbers for the faithful. And a change in leadership. Learn more about the new head of Catholic Charities USA. These stories and more tonight.
From EWTN, the Global Catholic Network, this is EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you for being with us on the feast of Saints Joachim and Anne, the grandparents of our Lord. Our top story tonight, President Joe Biden's son Hunter goes before a federal judge in Delaware for failing to pay taxes and possessing a gun. Today, the judge had to first sign off on any plea agreement, but that didn't happen. Tonight, the story continues to unfold just as the race for the White House heats up. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen?
Tracy, Hunter Biden's plea deal has fallen through, at least temporarily. A federal judge raised concerns about the terms of the agreement. Meanwhile, President Biden kept an open schedule today, nothing on it, a clean schedule, I should say, although his press secretary did hold a briefing, and she was asked about the president's son and his court appearance.
In Delaware, Hunter Biden heads into court this morning for his hearing before a judge. Among the charges, failure to pay more than $100,000 in taxes from over $1.5 million in income. The back taxes have reportedly since been paid. And when it was over, no plea deal. The judge expressing concern over related agreements on a more serious gun possession charge. That leaves open the years-long investigation into Hunter Biden's business dealings.
This case was handled independently, as all of you know.
And in the afternoon news briefing at the White House, Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre told reporters,
Hunter Biden is a private citizen, and this was a personal matter for him. As we have said, the President, the First Lady, they love their son, and they support him as he continues to rebuild his life.
The Justice Department conducted an investigation into the taxes and foreign business dealings of the president's second son. Hunter Biden made an agreement with prosecutors who plan to recommend 2 years probation. He was also charged with possession of a firearm by a person who was a known drug user, a felony. All this as former President Donald Trump may soon be indicted on new federal charges involving his 2020 election loss. Meanwhile, interest rates. The Fed's increasing them for the 11th time in 17 months. The Fed's still wary of inflation, which has been on a downward trend since last summer.
Inflation has moderated somewhat since the middle of last year. Nonetheless, the process of getting inflation back down to 2% has a long way to go.
Also today, methane. The White House announcing it will convene the first ever methane summit around the urgent need to dramatically reduce methane emissions, especially from leaks in the oil and gas sector, and advance President Biden's ambitious climate agenda.
And earlier today in the White House press briefing room, I asked National Security Council spokesman John Kirby about Senator Tuberville's current hold on military promotions, specifically regarding taxpayer dollars. Take a listen. And just real quickly, one of Tuberville's contentions is that taxpayer dollars should not be funding travel-related expenses for abortion for military members. You say what?
The President and the Secretary of Defense say that it should be. And so the military has put in place a policy, not one that Secretary Austin wanted to have to put in place, but these state laws are forcing him to put in place.
Now, Senator Tuberville has received a letter signed by 5,000 military veterans stating their support for the hold. And they also say the military is not supposed to, quote, subsidize the practice of destroying innocent children via abortion. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
While Congress is working its way through a mountain of spending bills, there is another topic heating up, at least among House Republicans, impeaching the Homeland Security Secretary, and there may be more. Some Republicans are moving towards impeaching President Joe Biden. They cite mounting evidence of possible money laundering and influence peddling. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales lays it all out for us. Eric?
Well, good evening, Trace. You know, House Speaker Kevin McCarthy is now taking the lead in favoring an impeachment inquiry regarding the Biden family finances. As House Republicans continue to dig deeper, the Speaker says the American people need to know the truth.
The more of this continues to unravel, it rises to the level of an impeachment inquiry. What that simply provides is that the American public has a right to know And this allows Congress to get the information to be able to know the truth.
Democrats tell me these investigations are fishing expeditions and irresponsible.
All they want to do is performance art. All they want to do is impeachment of Mayorkas, impeachment maybe of President Biden, and for nothing.
Well, they have only one master, and it's Donald Trump. I expect they'll do whatever he wants.
Members of the House Freedom Caucus tell me impeaching President Biden is the logical outcome.
And if it's not accountability now for the highest office holder in the land, when is it going to be? So he's right to do it, and I think he's going to continue. And I think at the end of the day, he will be impeached.
House Republicans also have their sights on Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. Republicans charged with failing to protect the southern border.
Your thoughts about Mayorkas? Mayorkas needs to go. This isn't new. The Biden regime is coming to an end.
Well, he's not doing his job. And it doesn't matter how many times he comes to the Hill, we don't hear the truth.
Democrats disagree.
Secretary Mayorkas has been doing a pretty good job of managing the border. You know, Title 42 was lifted after COVID. Everybody expected chaos at the border, and we got a good situation.
It is important to note that as of right now, no impeachment proceedings have been launched by House Republicans, and Senate Republicans are putting the brakes on all impeachment talks, at least for now. We do want to let you know about some other news. A bit of a scare. 81-year-old Minority Leader Mitch McConnell, during comments to reporters, well, he simply froze up and he stopped talking. He had to be escorted away, but later returned and said he was okay. You may recall that he suffered a concussion back in March, a few weeks ago, and he was out several weeks from the Senate for about 6 weeks. At the Capitol, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
Okay, thank you, Eric, for that. Well, Vatican prosecutor is asking a court to sentence Cardinal Becciu to 7 years in prison. The cardinal is among those accused of a range of financial crimes. In his closing arguments today, the Vatican prosecutor asked the court to convict Cardinal Becciu and 9 others. The Holy See is also seeking to be reimbursed around $460 million. EWTN News Vatican correspondent Colin Flynn joins us now with more. Colin, so what can you tell us about this morning's hearing?
A very good evening, Tracy. After a 2-year trial today, the Vatican prosecutor Alessandro Didi, he asked the court to sentence Cardinal Angelo Becciu, the highest-ranking Vatican official ever to face financial charges, to 7 years and 3 months in prison for alleged embezzlement, corruption and fraud. Now, Cardinal Becciu is 75 and he's from Sardinia. He was once one of the most powerful figures in the inner circle of Pope Francis. He's now on trial for what has become known as the Vatican Trial of the Century.
And we have been covering this trial extensively across our network. For those just tuning in, though, Colin, can you give us a bit of a background into this case?
Sure. Well, much of this trial centres around the purchase of a luxury building in London. This was an investment, Tracy, that was meant to make money for the Vatican, but instead costed hundreds of millions of euros. Some of the other charges arise from $138,000 of Vatican money that Cardinal Becciu donated to a Sardinian charity run by his brother. $635,000 paid to a self-styled security analyst, which he claimed was to release hostages in Mali. And as well as the prison sentence, the prosecutor asked that Cardinal Becciu be prevented from ever holding public office in the Vatican again, that he would be fined $11,000 and he repay $15 million in the form of assets and so on. Cardinal Becciu has steadfastly maintained his innocence, Tracy. In fact, Becciu's lawyers spoke after the hearing saying that he should be found innocent because he has always acted as, quote, a loyal servant of the Church.
And of course, Cardinal Becciu is one of 10 defendants in this case. What were their recommended sentences?
Well, Tracy, while Cardinal Becciu is the highest profile Vatican official to be charged, as you said, he's not the only one. The 10 other defendants in total are all facing charges for a range of financial crimes. And the prosecutor is asking them all to do time in prison with sentences ranging from 3 to 13 years. Also to pay the Vatican back $460 million for bad investments and financial losses over the past decade. The prosecutor, Didi, said that up until now, no one has offered to repay any of the damages, and he went on to say that these are people with means.
So, Colin, what happens next? And do we know when a decision will be reached on the future of these men? And also, will they see prison time?
Well, that's the big question, Tracy, and this is what Prosecutor Didi is asking for. I mean, it would be an incredible piece of history if, for example, Cardinal Becciu did time in prison. Remember, cardinals are also known as the princes of the church, and so for the Vatican to convict and jail one of its own would be extraordinary. After a summer recess, the defence and civil parties will deliver their own closing arguments, with a verdict expected by the end of the year. Tracy?
Okay, thank you so much, Colin, for that report. We appreciate it. We have a lot more still to come here on EWTN News Nightly, including threat in Africa, why the president of Niger says he is under threat, and nothing to see here. Reaction as the FBI refuses to release a document that appeared to target the faithful. Cambodia's longtime leader is stepping down. Hun Sen, who has been the country's autocratic leader for 38 years, says that he will leave the job in 3 weeks and has selected his eldest son to replace him. The soon-to-be new prime minister is the chief of Cambodia's army. He won a seat in parliament in a recent election. However, some groups claim the elections were neither free nor fair. Security guards have surrounded the house of the president of Niger, and African nations are calling it an attempted coup. The leader says that the army is working to end the uprising and will resort to violence if necessary. An opposition leader in Kenya is accusing the government of, quote, police atrocities. The opposition leader says that his party is assembling evidence that security forces targeted people from his ethnic community. Demonstrations have increased over the last few weeks, criticizing the president over the cost of living expenses and newly imposed taxes in the East African nation. And we go now to Edward Clancy, Outreach Director for Aid to the Church in Need. Ed, so good to see you. I know Aid to the Church in Need really has been following the situation from the very start in Kenya very closely, too. That said, can you give us a little bit more insight into what is happening there and just how dire is this situation?
Well, the President Ruto and the administration instituted tax increases, and as well as other changes that have caused some of the poor problems with their jobs and income. And because of that, an opposition leader, Azumio Umoja, is instigating sort of protests. And they clamped down on the protests so hard that protesters have been killed. And the Catholic Bishops' Conference of Nigeria has issued a statement in concert with the other faith leaders asking for the stop of the violence. And in fact, the Archbishop Muheria actually asked the president to suspend the new finance law and to institute changes that will be more gradual and still get the same results.
Yeah, Ed, and what do you think will come from that, the church getting involved in this?
Well, it's always hopeful because we have to be a voice for those who, have no voice or very little voice. And it's good that they're standing up for these people, because we can see in a lot of these countries that there is the possibility of the government getting overly dictatorial and clamping down on people who just really want to feed their children and maintain their businesses.
Yeah, it really is concerning. And what about the Aid to the Church in Need? How is your organization supporting things there?
Well, we work through the church, the local church, and as of right now, the church is working to help some of these poverty programs. But more importantly, right now, it's working on the dialogue between the different parties. And the Catholic Church was one of the groups that instigated the concerted letter to the president asking for changes and asking for more peace and calm.
I want to turn now to another country of particular concern, Nigeria, a country that we've discussed several times before. Why do you think the violence against Christians there, why does it continue? And what's being done to stop it? I mean, how has the international community responded? What would you like them to do?
Well, the situation in Nigeria is dire. In fact, Benue, the place that everyone in Nigeria seems to forget about, the center of the country, about 80% of all Christians killed for their faith are dying in Benue, in that one state. And the particular statistics of Benue are that it's 95% Christian and about 85% Catholic. So it's a very Catholic Christian dominated area. And they've been attacked by, so-called Fulani herdsmen. But in fact, what it is a terrorist activity. They're going in and destroying parts of the state. And in fact, the Diocese of McCurdy, which is in the capital of Benue, has lost 14 parishes and 840 churches and chapels in the last 7 years, just to show you the changes that have happened in that city, in that state. Additionally, since the beginning of last year, more than 600 people that are known by the diocese have been killed, and they've undertaken the project of actually taking these people's names down so they're not forgotten, because too many times when these things happen and there are a lot of killings, they just become numbers, and people forget that these are people. They have names, they have families, and there's a call to action when you hear a name.
Absolutely. Ed, we have less than a minute left, but I quickly want to talk about this. I know that your organization is working really hard to get Congress to act on this situation. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, Congressman Chris Smith, at the beginning of this year, instituted a resolution or wrote a resolution, and it was co-signed by Henry Cuellar from Texas. And the idea is to have Nigeria designated a country of particular concern and assign a special envoy to oversee what's going on there. And at the recent hearings in Washington, Congressman Smith brought up the topic of Nigeria, and he's been a champion. And Aid to the Church in Need has been helping the bishops in Nigeria to be a voice, because many of them do not want to be forgotten. As Bishop Anagbe, who I believe was on your program a few weeks ago, has said that it's a silent conspiracy of silence, that so many people are dying, 1.5 to 2 million people are displaced, and no one's talking about Benue. Can you imagine 2 million people who have left their homes, and now they're living in, they're not even camps, they're just gatherings of plastic tarps and mud and barely the barest elements for survival.
It's so hard to imagine. Ed, thank you so much for all that you guys do. We appreciate it and keeping this on the radar. Thanks so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Up next on EWTN News Nightly, the U.S. and the faithful. A new poll releases numbers on Americans' attitudes towards God and the devil. Plus, a laywoman becomes the new leader of a prominent Catholic aid group. Says the FBI still has not released the memo from the Richmond office that appeared to target Catholics who attend the traditional Latin Mass. Writing for FoxNews.com, Andrea Pachani-Bear says in part, quote, that even a field office of the FBI entertained religious profiling. That should shock the conscious. After all, racial and religious profiling has been shown not just to be ineffective, but also erodes trust, both in the police and governmental authorities. And we go now to Andrea Pachani-Bear, EWTN News legal analyst. Andrea, always so good to be with you. So what reasons did the FBI Director Christopher Wray give for not releasing the document? I mean, despite a Freedom of Information Act requesting it, is that even legal to do?
There are, Tracy, thanks first for having me on. It's always great to be with you. But there are some exceptions to FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act, and there is an exception for law enforcement agencies when there's active investigation and other things that are of the delicate sort. And we'll find out as Catholic Vote and Judicial Watch pursue their FOIA request, whether that exemption really is valid, a valid reason to keep it from that FOIA request. But there was some good news that the committee, the House Judiciary Committee's subpoena of the FBI for these documents was completed. The documents were handed over to Representative Jim Jordan and his committee. There was a little bit of a caveat, and there was a request from the FBI to keep that confidential, not to share with the public. We'll see whether that request is legitimate or not, but I think that this is another important step in this pursuit to make sure that, as you mentioned before, religious profiling isn't part of our federal law enforcement toolbox.
Yeah, and remind us again, Andrea, what caused the Richmond field office of the FBI to target the faithful, those who do attend the traditional Latin Mass?
You know, Tracy, it's really interesting. In the memo itself, the research that they were relying on were some pretty discredited groups. The Southern Poverty Law Center, which we know has been discredited both because of their founder's poor treatment of his own staff, but also for their proclivity to list everyone under the sun as a hate group, including great religious freedom groups like the Alliance Defending Freedom. So the fact that the federal law enforcement agency down in Richmond was relying on the designation by the Southern Poverty Law Center of traditional Latin mass goers as being somehow radical or threatening is really troublesome. I think that we should all ask and demand of our law enforcement agency to do their own investigatory work and to not rely on such discredited groups.
Yeah, and we know, I mean, only really about this particular memo from the Richmond field office, but is there concern that this may be happening elsewhere? We just don't know about it?
You know, we don't know what we don't know. But I do think that it was important that FBI Director Wray did say that denounced the memo when it became public, pulled it. And that in general, we need to hear from all levels of government rejecting this approach to investigation and federal law enforcement in general. I'd particularly like to hear from the president.
Yeah. For sure. We have about a minute or left, Andrea, but I'm curious, what else is on your radar right now? What are you following?
You know, I think that we should be paying attention to Jim Jordan's committee hearings. He has tomorrow a committee hearing related to gender identity and the due process rights of children and their parents when there's a pursuit in whether it be in schools or in other settings. I think that's something that all Catholics and all Catholic families should be alert to. And it's something that I think is going to be getting through our courts very soon and hopefully reach the Supreme Court quickly to reinforce the rights of parents and to reinforce their due process rights so that decisions affecting their children aren't done behind their backs.
Well, Andrea, we have to leave it right there, but always so good to be with you. We appreciate your insights.
Thanks, Tracy.
Well, a new poll says Americans' belief in God, heaven, and hell continues a prolonged decline. According to numbers from Gallup, just 74% of Americans say they believe in God, down from 79% in 2016. In 2001, the number of people who believed in God was 90%. Also, since 2001, the attitude towards believing in the devil, heaven, hell, and angels have seen double-digit declines among professed believers. Pope Francis has named a new leader for the Archdiocese of Dubuque, Iowa. Bishop Thomas Zinkula previously led the Diocese of Davenport, Iowa, in the southeastern part of the state. The 66-year-old replaces Archbishop Michael Jackals, who resigned due to health reasons. Catholic Charities USA has a new leader, a laywoman with a background in leadership and a long history of donating time and resources to the church. Carrie Alice Robinson is a graduate of Georgetown University and Yale Divinity School. She was among the founders of the Catholic group Leadership Roundtable. She will be the second woman and layperson to lead Catholic Charities. The aid group and its affiliates serve more than 15 million people each year. Finally tonight, a dedication is set to take place for a new church at Texas A&M University, and one recent graduate says the building is, quote, like a glimpse into heaven. St. Mary's Catholic Center and Church took around 10 years to complete and cost around $33 million. The interior features an altar facing the east, 12 freestanding piers symbolizing the 12 apostles, and can seat around 1,500 people. Texas A&M has an enrollment of 75,000 students, around 1/4 of whom are Catholic. And we thank you for watching tonight. Remember, you can follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at EWTN News Nightly. I'm Tracy Sable. Good night and God bless.